This is a math probability lesson 4.4, creating a questionnaire. We're going to learn about Samantha and her concern. We're going to look at some flowcharts about when you might use a questionnaire, and then you're going to create your own questionnaire and ask the people in your lives a question and get some data. So this one's always a fun lesson. Is it dark? Students always love this one. Usually we run around the school asking everyone in the elementary your question. We're going to have to get a bit creative about where you get your data from. If you have family at home, you can ask them. If you want to make your questionnaire accessible online, you could email it to some friends or message it to them. Take a picture of it in your group chat. You'll get creative. Okay. So, Chapter 4, Lesson 1, creating a questionnaire. So the goal is to create a questionnaire and use the results to answer a question. So Samara's parents are concerned about how much time she spends on the internet. She wants to show her parents that the amount of time she spends using the internet is not unusual. So, how can you collect and display data about students' internet use? Here's where you would pause and think about that question. Maybe jot down some of the thoughts you have, or maybe discuss it with a parent. So Samara, her solution is to choose a method for collecting data about internet use. She can't observe students since they use the internet in the evenings at their own homes. She can't do an experiment. She doesn't have time for individual interviews, so she'll use a questionnaire. What is a questionnaire? A questionnaire is a set of questions used to gather information from people. A questionnaire is sometimes used instead of interviewing people one by one. So here's what Samara's questionnaire could look like. She has 2 questions, both of which have 5 options. Question 1 says, how often do you check your email? Never. A few times a month. A few times a week. Almost every night. Every night. And her second question is, how often do you use the internet for instant messaging? Never. A few times a month. A few times a week. Almost every night. And every night. A few of the things that make Samara's questionnaire effective. If you'd like to pause and say what you notice about her questionnaire. 1, she doesn't have too many options. I would say 3 to 5 options are optimal. 2, she only has 2 questions, both of which are very straightforward. 3, her answers are in order from never to every night. She doesn't randomly place them. She actually uses an order. And she uses checkboxes so that somebody could just check off what their answer is real quick and give it to you. When you draw your own questionnaire out, you're going to want to think about how you collect your data. So one strategy I've seen in the past that works quite well is students will leave a space between each answer so they can actually keep a tally. And that way the person answering their question just needs to tell them, and then they can keep a tally right there. So that's what a questionnaire is. Think of a question, think about what the answers to that question would be, and then write it down in a fair way. One more thing I wanted to mention, all of these questions can be answered. They're not open-ended, they're specific. How often do you check your email? Right? They're questions that have answers. This is a flowchart of when you can use a questionnaire. So you'd start with this question here. Can I observe the data? No or yes. If you could observe it, you'd want to use observation to collect the data. Right? Like if you could just look, then that's the easiest way to get the data. If my question was, how many students are in class today? I can just observe that there's 0. Or whatever the example might be. But if you can't observe the data, then could you do an experiment on the data? If so, you want to do an experiment. Experiments are really accurate, and they're a great way to answer questions. We'll look at experiments later in this unit. But if you can't, then maybe you want to use a questionnaire. And if so, then use a questionnaire. Sometimes you can't use a questionnaire, and if so, you're going to have to look for another way to collect your data. So the activity, and I'll give you guys the rest of the week to complete this, is to create your own questionnaire and ask your family members, and then report your findings back to me. And this is a really open-ended assignment, so you need to think of a question that you want to answer. I'm not going to give you examples of what your questions could be, but Samara's question, right, was, what was it? Something about how much data do students use, right? How often do students check their email, and how often do they use the internet for instant messaging? So your question could be similar. You could be curious about how often your friends use their phones or their technology, or it could be completely different. And that's your assignment. Create your own questionnaire, ask at least your family members, and then report your findings back to me. Okay, enjoy.